Okay, we're going to get started here. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Cyber Psychology Seminar Series. My name is Dr. Julie Ansis, and I'm Professor and Cyber Psychology Director at NJIT. The Cyber Psychology Seminar Series is designed to showcase the many different facets of research and scholarship within the field of cyber psychology. The series features some of the nation's leading experts at the emerging intersection of psychology and technology. Some housekeeping. Please keep your mic muted. And Dr. Semizer would like to make this a relatively interactive experience, but she will be controlling that through various questions throughout her presentation. And during the last 15 or 20 minutes of her presentation, we'll have a question and answer period. If you could please put your questions in the chat box, and I will relate those questions to her. So we'll get started here. It is an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Yelda Semizer, who's my colleague in the cyber psychology program at NJIT. Dr. Semizer is an assistant professor in the cyber psychology program at New Jersey Institute of Technology. Before joining NJIT, she was a postdoctoral associate in the computer science and artificial intelligence lab at MIT. Dr. Semizer completed her PhD in the computational vision and psychophysics lab at Rutgers University and earned master's degrees in statistics, cognitive psychology, and psychological sciences. Her research uses a computational experimental framework involving computational modeling, behavioral psychophysics, and eye tracking to determine how the human visual system integrates sensory information to make perceptual judgments while accounting for uncertainty and statistical variability. The title of her talk today is Understanding Human Visual Perception and Its Limitations, the Role of Visual Clutter on Naturalistic Search Tasks. So Dr. Semizer, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Julie. It is so nice to be here. Thanks for the nice introduction as well. So today I'm going to talk to you about my research, specifically in relation to clutter and how the human visual system interacts with the characteristics of the visual environment. So I want to start with a little demo to give you a sense of how good our vision is. And to be able to do that, I'm going to show you an image very quickly, and I will ask you to tell me what you see. Okay, so you can put put your responses into the chat. I am looking at the chat, normally we do this like face to face. It's a lot easier. We'll see how it's gonna go. So let's look at this. So what do you see now? Get ready. Okay, here we go. Okay. So anyone, what was that an image of?
The contents of somebody's pocketbook.
Interesting. Okay, trees, forests, deers. You saw a deer. Interesting. Okay, so we want to see what it actually is. It is actually a couple of lions on a tree. So most of you, I'm assuming, some people also responded saying that it's a forest. So you can see some trees, maybe some animals, which is pretty good, right? Even like it was just I showed that image to you, not even a second, maybe less than a second, and your visual system was able to get the gist of it. And then this is really amazing. But if I ask you how many lions did you see, or what was the animal that you saw, it's possible that you might not really have a good representation of that. So although we are really good at getting the gist of a scene, if we are asked about the details of the scene, it's possible that we might miss things. And this can't be just because we are bad at recognizing objects, because we are really good at recognizing objects. For example, this is a cat, right? And this is a cat, and this is also a cat. When you think about it, what visual system is doing is amazing. Each image has a different cat in it, and each cat has a different color, different texture, shape, and shading. We can't even see the cat as a whole in the first image, for example, but we only see the parts of it. But we still can immediately say that this is a cat. You might also say that, so because we are really good at the object recognition, you might also say that, but you showed us the first image just a millisecond, right? So how can we actually say, like, recognize the object then? If we had more time, then we could definitely identify all the lions for you, right? You might even say that. And that could be true. But think about the times when you look for your keys in your bag or the remote in the living room over and over again. You search for it. And then you realize that it's just in front of you, but you don't actually see it for some reason, right? So what is that reason? It can be many things. And one of the reasons that I'm interested in is that, which is also relevant for this talk today, is this. What limits us is the fact that our representation of the visual world is not the same everywhere. So I'm going to do another demo for you to get a sense of what I mean by that. So let's see. So this is an old demonstration. So it's possible that you already know the answer. So if you do, please play along and not reveal it. But let's see how it's going to go. So I'm going to show you a video of people passing a basketball, and I will ask you to count the number of passes the team in white make. Okay, so here we go.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go!
Okay, pretty good. So how many did you count? 12, 13. Oh, wow. Awesome. 11. That's good. But did you see something else? So did you see?
The answer
this?
is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
So this is pretty cool, and it is it's a phenomenon called inattentional blindness, and the idea is basically that it's easy to miss things if you are not looking for them. Okay, and you might again say that, oh, well, this is an unfamiliar task and something that we will probably never do in real life. Like we're not experts in counting the number of passes people make. And if we were, then we would never miss it, right? You can say this, but unfortunately, that is not the case either. And people specifically looked at this. A study with radiologists they asked radiologists to look for lung abnormalities in these images, and they placed a little gorilla, which is like here. I don't know if you can see it, but which is 48 times larger than a typical lung nodule. And only 83 of radiologists searching for nodules in these images were able to identify the gorilla, which is amazing. They didn't see it. This tells us that even with expertise, we are still prone to missing things that we're not looking for. And now you might say, okay, but we are navigating in the world like let me add this. So they also track these observers, these experts' eyes as they're doing this task, and most of them were able to land their eyes on where the gorilla was actually located, but they still didn't report it. Okay, so it is not just about sensation, it's more about perception. And now again, you can say that, but we are navigating in the world. If we are so bad at missing things, like how are we actually doing and living our lives, right? That's amazing, isn't it? One way our visual system is adapting to its environment is by using the rules that it already knows, and it's correcting for us all the time, and we're not even aware of it. And sometimes its correction is actually misleading. And there are many great ways to illustrate this point. And the most effective way, in my opinion, is using visual illusions. So let me introduce you the leaning tower illusion. So when you look at these two images, what do you see? Which one do you think is more tilted? The one on the left or the one on the right? So you can again put into the chat your responses, right? Yes, clearly the one on the right looks a lot more tilted, right? In fact, these two pizza towers are tilted the same way. And let me show you, hoping that you can actually cover one or the other with your hand on the screen, and you can see that they're exactly the same image. Okay, but when you see them side by side, for some reason, the one on the right is a lot more tilted to the right. So let me just try to demonstrate that, saying that they're like actually the same. And the inventors of this illusion say that it occurs because the visual system knows about perspective, and the visual system thinks that these two towers are in the same visual space because they're like side by side. And then it knows that when two identical towers are rising and when they're side by side and in parallel, they would converge in space. Okay, and the visual system knows about this, and it correctly perceives it as parallel. But when the tower is the pizza tower, which is already tilted to start with, then the towers do not converge and they rise, but they rise in parallel. So the visual system says that, okay, so it's not converging. So it's probably the fact that they are not in parallel. So it tries to correct for that. That's why we see the one on the right a lot more tilted than the other one. So this clearly illustrates that we rely on our prior knowledge, and our visual system is really good at some things, and also it also fails at other things, and it tries to correct the things for us. So all of these things, I think, make studying visual perception interesting. So let me now go into what I'm going to talk about today. Okay. So today I'm going to discuss 3 of the projects that I worked on, and the questions that I'm interested in fall under 3 different categories. The first one is about visual search. I already showed you examples of search, which is the act of looking for objects like the lions in a tree in a visual environment. In everyday life, we constantly engage in searches, and these tasks can actually inform us about the limitations of our visual system. And today I specifically to talk about how search informs us about the visual system and how it interacts with the characteristics of the system, of the environment. Another topic that I'm going to discuss is called peripheral vision. So peripheral vision is the vision as it occurs away from the gaze of point. So when you're directing your gaze at a point, you still have a lot of information coming from the peripheral areas, right? And I'm interested in how much information do you perceive at a glance, because we don't see the world as snapshots. Rather, we have a stable percept of the world as we go around it, right? So how does the visual system achieves it? How much information is lost or perceived at a single glance? So I'm interested in that. And lastly, I want to also give a sense of the fact that expertise is a really great way of studying visual perception, because it can tell you the way that through training and practice, we can actually overcome some of the limitations of our visual system. And specifically, I'm going to talk about the radiologists and how they make use of the information that's available to them in the images that they're using for diagnostic purposes. Okay, so let's get started. So you might ask, okay, why are you studying search? Because it is fun, right? As a kid, most of us enjoyed finding Waldo bugs. And in this image, for example, you might think, like it's kind of hard to find Waldo, right? So think about, why do you think that is so hard? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you about finding Waldo this time for demonstration purposes. It's going to be a torture. But for one thing, there are too many colors and shapes, right, that you have to look for. And some of them are like sharing a lot of features with Yelda itself. And then there's clutter. That is like there's too much stuff to look for, to go through, right? And then there's uncertainty with respect to where Yelda is. For example, Yelda can be anywhere in this image. If I showed you a living room scene, for example, and asked you to locate a painting, then your task will be a lot easier, because you know that the paintings are usually on the wall, not on the floor. Then you wouldn't spend so much time looking up at the floor, right? You would spend most of your time looking at the walls. In this case, when there's uncertainty about the location of the object, then you also have to account for that, right? In case you were searching the whole time when I was speaking for Yelda, old habits, right? So here he is, if you're interested finding him. So search is also relevant. So it's fun, but it's also relevant for more crucial tasks, like looking for a tumor in an X-ray image. This task heavily relies on the perceptual system, and the performance in this task can have very critical consequences. So studying search is really crucial. So we said that clutter is important, right? In this Yelda image, for example. So clutter can make search difficult in many ways. For example, it adds a lot of items to check. In this visual search literature, we use the term called set size to refer to the number of items or locations that you need to check to find a target. So the clutter itself increases the set size. For example, when presented with this site, you would have a really hard time trying to locate the item that you are interested in buying. So even a simple tasks like locating a cursor might be challenging in this site. So if you remember that the cursor was in one of these 3 locations that I just marked, then the last time you see it, then your task is a little bit easier. But again, because it's reduced the set size, but now you have to search for like less number of things. But again, it's still challenging, because there's still stuff around the locations that's affecting you, right? So that is actually the effect of clutter per se, that's independent of the set size. That there's just stuff there, and it's interfering with your ability to find the cursor. Okay, so if the site was a lot less cluttered like this one, then finding the cursor would be a lot easier for you. Okay, what is clutter then, right? You might ask now, what is clutter? What are you talking about when you say clutter? And we are really good at judging what's clutter. You all know intuitively what clutter is, and I will show you that you do know. So I'm going to show you 2 images, one on the left and one on the right, and I want you to tell me intuitively which one you think is more cluttered, left or the right. Yes, exactly. So it's the left one, right? So we are pretty good at judging clutter, because we all intuitively know what clutter is. But if you were a researcher like me and you were interested in studying clutter, then how would you go about measuring it in these images, right? You might say, okay, I would just look at the number of objects, because number of objects, if there are more objects to search for, then there's going to be more clutter. That is probably true. But then there is the question of how do you define an object, right? Like if there's texture elements on the object, if there's a book with text on it, do you think a ledger is an object, or the book itself is an object? Like, how would you go about that? So these are like the challenges of studying with natural images, but it also, at the same time, it makes studying natural images a lot more fun and interesting. So clutter actually is an ill-defined concept, and different researchers have their own definitions of it when it comes to clutter and how to measure it. And I will talk about this today later in the talk. So this one was the more cluttered one. Okay, so let me just briefly talk to you about one of the projects that we worked on in relation to clutter and search. So to look at the effect of clutter on search behavior, we gathered these images from What's in Your Bag group on Flickr. And we quantified the amount of clutter in these images using a mathematical model of clutter. Okay, and for using this metric, we show that, for example, the image on the right was a lot more cluttered than the image on the left. And here, the particular the colors are just representing the segments in each image. So after measuring the clutter for the images in our image data set, we designed a search task. So the task was to locate a target object in an image using an eye tracking setup. So here, for example, in this image, we have, so the target is a key located here, okay, a set of keys. And these little dots are representing the possible locations where the target can appear, the target object. So observers already know that those are the possible locations. So we are hoping that they're going to use that as a set size of to make use of those locations. And only one of those fall on the object. So the task was locate the target object. We measured how long it takes for people to locate the object. We give them high or low clutter images, and then we change the set size to 5 or 13. And the idea here is basically, even if we tell people that these are the possible locations where the object can appear, we still see to expect an effect of clutter. Okay, and that actually is what we found. And people search for different objects like cell phones, glasses, iPods, keys, and pens. Okay. And there were also images where there were targets appearing and not appearing. So the task was very simple. It's a typical search task. So we first showed them cues like this, and they press a key, which brings up the image, and then they search for the image, the object in the image, and they press another key to locate, to say that, okay, I made my decision whether there's an object or not in this image that I'm looking for. And then we show them so that would give us the search time, and then we show them the cues again, and then they will look at the location where I thought that the target appeared, and we would give them real-time feedback using the eye tracker. And if they thought that there was no target and there was another cue at the outside that they would just indicate, and then that would give us the accuracy. Okay, so the fixation, so I'm going to show you two types of results. The first one is the fixation distribution. Oh, the background. The background is basically not anything that is not the image itself. Okay. Sorry, anything that's not the target itself. So first we looked at the distribution of fixations observers made. Here the eccentricity represents the how far away the points are from the center of the image. Okay. So the lighter color represents the fact that people looked at those locations more often than other locations. And you can see that you can actually see the 5 cues here because people looked at those locations a lot more. And this is the 13 location case, and you can actually see this, it's coming up. You can see where the cues are located here, right? And this is basically like a sanity check, saying that people actually use the cues to make their decisions. Okay, and this is the main result. So this is a little bit complicated graph to go over. So I'm going to quickly go over it, but I'm going to give you the gist of it at the end. Okay, so here we have the relevant set size and the search time and target present and target absent trials. So I'm going to show you the clutter results. So each line is from a different observer searching for one object. Okay, you can see that most of the red lines are above the blue lines, which says that the high clutter actually increases the search times. And you can see that we have an increasing slope from location 5 to 13, which is just saying that if you have more locations to search for, then it's going to take longer for you to find the object, which is not that interesting. But what's interesting is that there's actually an effect of what you're looking for. Like, it depends what the object is. Your performance depends on what the object is. And that is also super interesting. And I'm not going to go into detail for the purpose of this talk, but if you're interested, I can talk to you about that later. The main idea is basically this. If you have more clutter to search for, regardless of the number of locations you have to search for, it's going to impair your performance. Okay. So with this project, we were able to show that the clutter is a limiting factor in visual search independently of set size. Now that I showed you that, I want to talk to you about peripheral vision. Okay, so so our visual perception is pretty good at the center of our gaze. We already know that. Okay, so that where we look at, we have a good representation of it. But as we go to the periphery, we lose information, and it's an interesting question to ask how much information we lose. Okay, or how much information is available to us. So this study specifically is going to look at that. Oh, so I was going to tell you. So I'm showing you a maze now, and I want you to tell me which one is the correct solution. So you can start from the bottom and solve it. Okay, awesome. Yes, it is 2. Pretty good, pretty quick. So get ready. I'm going to show you another one. Okay, and it's the task is the same. Yes, exactly. Thank you. I'm hoping that now you realize that the second maze was actually harder to solve than the first one. I'm hoping that you get that sense, because it probably took like a little bit longer for you to solve that one. In fact, these 2 mazes are exactly the same, I must say. It's just one has wavy walls, the other one is a straight wall. And this is basically, we're trying to make the maze more perceptually challenging to study eye movements. And this is what we did in this. So you basically were now my participants in this task, except the fact that I actually tracked their eyes when they were doing this. So so let me just step back and then motivate this study a little bit more. So we were interested in what information survives and lost in the peripheral vision. And when presented with a scene like this, what do we perceive at a glance, right? That's the question. If we direct our gaze at the center of the scene, like this, where this cursor, where this fixation cross is, we'll probably have a good representation of what's available to us at near our gaze. But we also have a lot of information coming from the peripheral areas, right? We can even, like, just looking at here, we can even say that there's a street name around here, right? Maybe we cannot read it, but we can say it. And we can visualize how much information is available using a model of peripheral vision. That is a texture tiling model developed by Rosenholz and colleagues. And TTM encodes its inputs in terms of a reach of image statistics. And these statistics summarize the local input over sizable pooling regions. For each combination of the input and a fixation, we can generate a number of these images. And these are called, I'm sorry, I don't know what's happening. These are called the mongrels. Okay, and these model visualizations are actually showing us what our visual system is seeing when we are looking at the center, for example. You can see that the information is that the center is pretty well preserved, but as you go out, you can see like the letters are kind of like jumbled around, so you cannot really, it's a street, but you don't know like the name of it. So you have to actually look for it. And this is interesting because then you can decide, you can ask, okay, where am I going to look next in this image, right? You can ask that question if you know what's available to you in the previous fixation point. And that is exactly what we are doing in this study. So we use 2D mazes as stimuli, like you see here. Mazes can be hard or for many reasons, for cognitive reasons or perceptual reasons, and we're interested in the perceptual factors here. So we wavified each maze like that, and then we asked people to mentally solve these mazes as we track their eyes. So they're just solving it with their eyes, no, like they're not tracking. So there's no motor component. So in each trial, observers were asked to fixate at a green dot, which represents the starting point. And then they pressed the key, which showed the image, and then they were asked to solve the maze again, and then they pressed the key. I'm sorry, I don't know why is it going forward. And then these 3 locations came up, and they were asked to tell us and look at the location they think the correct solution was. Okay, and I'm going to show you the results. So first of all, people were super accurate, 99% or above. Solving this maze, these mazes, because there's no time limitation, so they can take as much as time they want. but what's interesting for us is that wavy mazes required a lot more fixations to solve than the other one for each of our observers. And we were also interested in whether actually having wavy mazes, whether people actually like make a lot larger saccades. I'm sorry, I don't know why this is going forward. Okay. Okay, so we were interested in seeing how people decide where to look next when they are solving these mazes. Okay, so what we looked at is we basically came up with this measure. Maybe I can stop sharing and then start sharing again because I don't really know why this is happening. Sorry about that. Technical problems. Okay. All right. Okay. So what we did was for each path length, that is like how long is the path, we divided that by the number of fixations, and that gives us a idea of how quickly people jumped around when they're searching these mazes, and this is called like the saccades in eye tracking literature. And now with many with wavy mazes, we show that observers' saccades took significantly shorter steps along the path than the other way. So then using the texture tiling model that I just described, for a given fixation point, we synthesize images to visualize what the visual system is actually able to see. Okay, how far along the path our visual system was able to see in solving these mazes. And we assume that the model is going to look at the location where the path becomes unclear next. And this gives us the model fixations for each of the mazes. Then we compare the number of fixations for the model and the human. And here I'm showing you what it looks like. In this graph, each dot represents a maze, and the lines represent the least square fits. And overall, although the model makes fewer fixations than the observers, than the humans, what's perceptually challenging for the model was also challenging for the human. Now, the next question is, why do we see a difference between the model and the human, right? So are observers being overly conservative in choosing their next fixation location? And we devised this task where we are actually asking people to say whether the next point, the next fixation of the model is actually on the path or off the path. So this is like a detection task. They are trying to decide. So they are looking. So this is a single fixation study, which means they cannot move their eyes. Okay. So basically, they are looking at one point, like this green dot here, and then we show them the black dot, and they are not allowed to make any eye movements. So they try to just see it in their periphery and decide whether that's on the path or off the path. Okay. So average observer saccades traveled 2.6 units along the maze path, but the model predicted that observers could make saccades, that's the jumps, on average 7.1 units along the path. But nonetheless, if you ask the observers to judge whether a point near the model fixation is on the path or off the path, they were still able to do that 77% of the time. So we can see that people are actually jumping a lot shorter than they can see when they're solving these mazes than predicted by the model. Okay, so in this study, we show that the TTM can help us understand what information survives the peripheral vision, and we can actually make use of this information when we are trying to decide where to look next. And until now, I talked to you about the limitations of the visual system, right? And I want to spend the last 10 minutes of the talk trying to get you the idea of that our visual system can do a lot better through practice and training. Okay, and I'm going to look at the role of expertise, and specifically, I am going to look at the radiologists for this. Okay, so radiology experts, they look for abnormalities in medical images, and there's this line of research called medical image perception. And studies on medical image perception examine how radiologists search for abnormalities. And there's one specific line of research, but that specifically focuses on rapid processing ability, meaning these studies show that expert radiologists can quickly extract the global information from these images very quickly. And in the case of mammograms, for example, there is evidence suggesting that radiologists can discriminate between normal and abnormal breast tissue within 250 milliseconds. But if you ask them whether they can locate the abnormality, they cannot tell you where it is, but they can say that there's something abnormal, I have a feeling, okay, which is amazing. So the question is, how are they doing that? Okay, so there's a recent paper by Evans and her colleagues where they strongly demonstrated this ability. And the main result from their paper is the following. So you can take an abnormal breast with a lesion in it, okay, and extract a section from it without the lesion. And then the radiologist can still tell you that that breast was abnormal, even though they don't see any lesion in it. So that's amazing. And they can even do that for the opposite breast. But how do they do that? So there has to be some sort of a signal that's signaling them and making them to think that there's something abnormal. So let me actually go back and look further. Okay. So first of all, this study is not going to tell you that this is how radiologists should behave and how they should do diagnostic purposes, but it is just telling you that in a second they have information available to you that we novices don't have. Okay, and so this study I'm going to talk to you about today is going to say that this signal might be a statistical signal. Okay, and we are going to look at texture descriptions for that. So texture descriptions are these set of spatial statistics, stationary statistics, and we use these texture descriptions to characterize the global signal of abnormality and test it whether radiologists rely on these texture descriptions as they are interpreting the mammograms. Okay, and we use Portillo-Simoncelli's model to do this. So our stimuli were extractions, sections from mammograms. Okay, so here you can see examples of it. So the first one, so we have normal images, which doesn't have any abnormalities in them, and they're from normal breasts. And there are also abnormal images, and we have two types of abnormal images. So one of them has lesions in them specifically, so there's a localized lesion in it, and the other one doesn't have any lesion, but it was extracted from an abnormal breast. So we computed the texture descriptions for these images, and then we synthesized breast tissue. Okay, so the ones that you see, all these three columns, are actually not real breast tissue. They are synthesized tissue. Okay, and the idea is basically this. So if there's a global signal of abnormality that is just based on the statistics of the image, these images in each row, they are sharing the same statistics. So if the radiologist thinks that, for example, the first image is abnormal, then they are probably going to think that its corresponding synthesized image is also abnormal if they're relying on this statistical signal. Okay, and we did a task that is, again, very simple. So the task was to rate the abnormality of a briefly presented tissue section. At the start of each trial, people were presented with this cross, and then they saw this image very quickly, and then it went away. Radiologists are doing this, and then they were asked to give a rating between 0 to 100 by sliding a bar, and to indicate that how likely that they would call back this patient. Again, like, they are not doing a diagnostic judgment now. So this is just to give an idea. Would you like to call back this patient for further examination? Okay. And depending on the condition, observers were asked to either discriminate between normal and lesion absent cases or between normal and lesion present cases. And I'm going to show you the ROC curves. So in medical image perception literature, these readings are usually analyzed constructing ROC curves. But before showing you the data, let me just introduce you briefly how to read the graphs for ROC curves. They are constructed by plotting the true positive and the hit rate against the false positive and false alarm rate. So in the context, in our example, for example, the hit rate is when radiologists correctly say that the tissue was abnormal, and the false alarm rate is when the radiologists incorrectly say the tissue was abnormal. Okay, and the diagonal here gives the chance performance. So anything above the diagonal will be a better performance, and anything below will be a worse performance than the chance. Okay. And the way that people quantify performance here is using just computing the area under the curve, okay, whichever curve you have. So now look at our data. So I'm going to show you the ROC curves for lesion absent cases for real and synthesized first. You can see that everything is above the curve, above the line, so which is good. This is about the chance. So each line is a radiologist, and the thick line is basically the average. And you can see that the performance is similar between real and synthesized. So whatever it is available in the real, we were able to replicate it in the synthesized one as well. And when you look at the lesion present cases, of course, the real one is a lot better because there's a localized signal in there that people are using, radiologists are using. But still, when you look at these three cases, that's not only thing that's available to them is the summary statistics, and they seem to be using that to guide their decisions. Okay, so in the study we show that radiologists can use the available information at a glance to guide their diagnostic judgments. And again, this is not saying that this is how they should read the diagnostic. They should do the diagnostic process, but it is just telling you that there is something there that they're actually using because they're so good at they're so trained in reading these images. And right now we're also working on trying to understand how this is developed through training, which is quite interesting. So for the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to briefly talk to you about what this all imply and what we are working on for the future. Of course, we are living in a lot more complex world, right? Like what we are doing in the lab is only limited, and it would be a lot more interesting to look for other real-world search tasks, real-world tasks in general, and using eye tracking and VR, for example. And we are working on that. And another question is, how does clutter inform design choices, right? Because as I showed you the demo in the beginning with the web pages, it's interesting to ask how the clutter affects your behavior when you're actually navigating in those pages. And another question that we are interested in, we are currently working on, is this video conferencing tools like this one that we're doing, right? What are the perceptual factors that are out there are affecting our experiences when we are actually video conferencing? And knowing what information is available at a glance also has implications where for these web pages, you can decide where you want to put the important information if you know what's available to them, what's available to the visual system at a glance. And it's also interesting to ask how does the search target and the background interact with clutter? And we're actually developing a new clutter metric, which is specifically designed for search tasks, and in terms of what you are looking for. How does the characteristics of what you're looking for and your representation of it interacts with what's out there in front of you? And we also are working on how does the radiologist actually develop this ability of rapid processing, and And we are at NJIT Cyber Psychology, and I will be happy to talk more, either now or through emails or other means, if you're interested in any of the things that I talked about today. And thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Dr. Semizer. That's just fascinating work. And I hope you've encouraged people to come over to the cyber psychology side, or at least work with psychologists on these important issues. We have a question from Bevan Wathen. Do you notice that certain groups of people notice things differently, or is it only designed to identify most commonly noticed traits for images?
So I thank you, Bevan. This is a great question, but well, I guess I'm wondering which study this is specific to. Is this the Maze? If it's the Maze study, looking at the timing of the question, we didn't really look at like any individual characteristics of image with discrete. Oh, okay. We didn't. That's an interesting question. Well, I'm not really aware of much of the individual differences in search behavior, but I would assume that there can be some differences in terms of like how well you can tolerate clutter, for example, when searching in these images.
Just wondering for learning differences.
Oh, you mean like perceptual learning? Like when you would train these people?
Or maybe people with, I know we're hypothesizing about tenure.
Maybe going to people, I don't know.
Perceptual. Yes to Dr. Semizer or me.
This is like how I teach, trying to understand what the question was. But yeah, yes, there probably is. There's a good line of research on perceptual learning. Like we know expertise, for example, like when you talk about perceptual learning, of course, expertise comes into play. And we know that, for example, for attention, if you are like there's this line on video game players, like if you're a first person shooter video game player, for example, people show that that actually trains your attention very well and translates into other tasks. So people study these things. Yeah.
Yeah. Were you still answering? Sorry.
I hope that answers the question. Thank you, Bevan.
Similar to this, I was thinking of what you were just talking about, and I was thinking about the role of physiological arousal, because that wavy maze is anxiety provoking, and some of us, it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this, and there's a hesitation with that. Similarly, in terms of cluttered spaces, so I think of folks in my own family, in my upbringing, where one parent, for example, couldn't stand any clutter, wanted clean lines, it drove that person crazy. And the other person was perfectly happy with lots of clutter and was able to find things really easily within that arena. So yeah, I wondered about sort of individual differences with that, and also the role of physiological arousal in limiting our perceptual frame.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, and I believe that there are individual differences, and I am not aware of any literature on that. But this is something that we are currently working on, and through a collaboration, trying to understand what are the factors of traits, like Bevan suggested, that are like that would make some people more prone to clutter. Like they actually want clutter to function well, for example. Mm-hmm. This is similar to the idea of like anecdotally, and also there's some early work on this, like auditory arousal, right? When some people prefer to work in the coffee shops, and some people prefer to work in like the libraries, they say. And like some people like to have the music on when they study, right? So there's this arousal theory, right? And that could be interesting to see if that also exists in the visual world. And that is something that we are currently looking at through actually design of architectural spaces, rather than just like images like this. We are actually going to ask people to design a living room that they would live in, and try to see whether that correlates with any individual differences.
Interesting. Any other questions, thoughts? How do you think drastically, Saren Guvenk, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. How do you think drastically increased screen time would affect new generations' perception? Maybe more fatigue or more familiarity with static images? Interesting question.
Interesting question, definitely. I don't know the answer to that. I'm assuming people are studying it, but I'm not aware of any of the work that is there. But they are introduced to the screen at a very early age. So it's not really my expertise, but that's an interesting question.
I've read some work, I don't know what the research is behind it, that it's causing us to sort of view things in a more kind of vertical, linear fashion as we're scrolling information.
Oh, that is interesting. Yeah, because
It's the horizontal of reading a book.
Yeah, that's super interesting because so we know that in vision, your visual system is actually a lot better at this angle than this. Horizontally, like if you realize I didn't really show you that. So this is gonna be like hacking my own presentation, but let me just show you.
Co-host.
So this is from a different study that I didn't talk about today, but so we can actually measure your vision, like how your vision falls off as you go away from the point of gaze. Okay, and here what I'm showing to you is we have like 4 different observers, and these people basically looked at the screen, at the center of the screen, and tried to locate targets as they appear in their periphery, and we changed the visibility of the target so that sometimes it was hard, sometimes it was easy, and then we looked at how their performance changed as a function of that. And you can see now that the lighter colors is better performance, and of course, if it's at the center, you are really good. And as you go away from the center, your performance decreases. But you can also realize that your performance is actually a lot better. Your vision is a lot better on the horizontal axis than the vertical one. Right? That's been found repeatedly, and what you're suggesting now is that can actually change for the next generation, maybe, because if we are doing this more than this, then it is possible that we might see this might change.
And what's the connection between that and sort of cognition, or sort of understanding or learning information, or even retaining of information? Do you know about the connection there?
I'm not really. Are you suggesting that, like, if you present something on this axis, you're going to remember it more than that? That is possible.
Understand it more, or is it just that we're bombarded with information, which is making it harder to retain?
Yeah, that is possible. At the same time, remember that these are like single fixations. So normally eye movements are not costly. So you can make eye movements very easily without much cost, because, right? Like, so when you actually go into asking people to do tasks where they can like freely move their eyes, the effects of these gets a lot more minimal. But it's an interesting question too.
Bevan Wathen. I wonder if Bevan is doing research in this area. It'd be interesting to hear. But, you know, he's talking about our interaction with our environment and having potential to shape, yes, how we sort the information.
Definitely. And the task itself too, like what you're doing in that environment is actually determines how you're interacting with it. Again, when you're looking for an image, if you're searching for a mug versus if you're searching for a painting, is going to determine where you're going to look. So the task itself is important when you're thinking about these things as well.
Right. Okay. Bevan's giving more information. Okay.
Nice to meet you, Bevan.
Okay. Namaste. Any last questions of Dr. Semizer? Okay. Well, thank you so much. This is
Thank
just
you.
really fascinating work, again, with so many implications to the world in which we live in and our interactions with the world. And of course, cognition and learning and interpersonal interactions, etc. So thank you again for taking your time. And I know Dr. Semizer has I'll say for her, a lab at NJIT and cyber psychology. So if students who I know are watching now are interested in doing some work with you, they could reach out to you.
Yes, yes. We're almost up and running. We have all of our major equipment in. So anyone who's interested in what I talked about today is welcome to join the lab and work with me.
Excellent. Okay. So thanks again. And please join us for our next and our last, for this semester at least, cyber psychology seminar. And that's Monday, April 26th, from 11 to 12 Eastern Daylight Time. And you could sign up on the Eventbrite page. The title of that talk, which will be given by another one of our colleagues, Dr. Rebecca Rutkoff, is Under the Radar, Lillian Schwartz at Bell Labs. And if you're not familiar, Lillian Schwartz was the creator and early creator and pioneer of early computer art. So that should be a fascinating talk as well. Thank you everyone for joining us and for your wonderful questions. And we'll see you at the next webinar series.
Thank you.